Well, hey, biology, hope you're doing well when you watch this video. So this is about photosynthesis. We're taking notes at home so we can watch a few videos in class and also play a Jeopardy review game, hopefully, which will be fun and exciting. But of course, photosynthesis, you've been learning about photosynthesis since elementary school. And so, oh, my bad. And so it's definitely something that, of course, you know about the sunlight probably, and CO2 goes into the plants, and we make sugars, and oxygen is released. But not all of the oxygen is released into the environment. Some of it is used by the plants to do cellular respiration, which we'll talk about after this video, of course. And then water, of course, plants need water. And so I might show you this video in class depending upon time, but yeah, photosynthesis, you know, in some ways it's kind of similar to solar panels, right? According to the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So we're going from sun energy or light energy, and then we're going to convert that into chemical energy. With solar panels, we're still going from sun energy, but instead of chemical, we're going to electrical. Ooh. And so it's similar in ways. It has its, similarities. How do plants, and so here's some big questions. How do plants and other organisms capture energy from sunlight? So we're going to talk about pigments. How do we store it? What is involved, which is huge as far as, photosynthesis goes. And how do they convert it, right? Because energy can't be created or destroyed. And so first off, why are plants green? Well, it's pretty cool to think about this, but plants absorb, in the visible light spectrum right here. Plants love absorbing, of course, most plants. The red, Roy G. Biv, right? The red part and the bluish purple part, they absorb it. And so what they don't absorb is what is reflected. And that is what we see. And so the light that is reflected is what we see. So plants, out of the electromagnetic spectrum, the visible light part, what plants don't absorb for energy is what we see. And so we see the green. And so energy travels from the sun in the form of electromagnetic radiation. You know this if you've ever had a sunburn. Our eyes see the different wavelengths. Here's that Roy G. Biv, right? Going backwards, Roy G. Biv. And so, indigo. And so we see that as colors. If you have the correct, cells and genetics to see color. Some people are colorblind in certain ways. But plants love absorbing here and here. And they reflect a lot. I'll do a different color. They reflect a lot right here. They reflect it because they can't, they don't have the pigments necessarily. Not all plants, but, a lot of plants. And so this is called pigments, right? What plants absorb light with. And there's two main pigments, chlorophyll A, which is the main one, and chlorophyll B. And chlorophyll is the principal pigment, okay? Like the main one. There's other pigments, which we'll talk about here in a second. And so leaves reflect green light, which is why plants look green, okay? And so we'll talk about this, but I can show you this right now. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see right here that on the side, we're talking about absorption, right? What are we absorbing? And notice that we're absorbing like between 60, 80, 40% from here over, right? Violets, indigos. We're absorbing lots of oranges and reds too. But notice that we are not absorbing right here. Not much, at least. And that is why that is reflected, okay? And so used to love going up to the mountains, seeing the leaf change colors. I've actually seen a lot of pretty leaves in Florida due to the really cold weather that we've had this year. And but why does this happen? Well, and you can summarize this if you want to pause and read over this. I'm not going to dive into this, but just basically right here, plants shut down chlorophyll production, okay? And so when plants shut that down, like right here, boom, gone, because they can sense, right? Living things respond to their environment. Plants can sense when it's getting colder, when the sunlight is going, the number of sunny days and the actual hours of sunlight is decreasing. Plants are like, hey, we're going into winter. We need to conserve energy, stop producing chlorophyll. And so these accessory pigments start showing up. And so chlorophyll fades right here, and then therefore revealing yellows and oranges because of these accessory pigments. Like maples, glucose is trapped. Sunlight, cool autumn nights turn the sugars red. So that's like the maple tree, which is fun. So pigments, plants also contain red and orange pigments, such as carotene, right? And so most of the time, the green color of chlorophyll overwhelms the other pigments. But during the fall, when we shut this down, that's why it's kind of seen. So you can see right here, these are different pigments in plants, or, in certain types of plants. The main ones, and the ones you really have to know about, chlorophyll A, let me do a different color. Chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. And knowing where they absorb. This graph will definitely be on a test or assessment. But you can see the carotenoids, I think I said that right. They don't absorb over here. They absorb a little green. But the yellows and oranges, they would reflect. And so that's why when chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B production goes down, these guys start showing up, these accessory pigments, okay? And if you ever wonder about blueberries and strawberries and why they look the way they do, well, they have different pigments, and they're reflecting different lights, okay? And so that's important. But remember, this will be on a quiz or a test. Again, wavelength of light is on the X, and how much absorption is happening on the Y. And so knowing the anatomy of a leaf is important. This was what the worksheet that we did in class was about. And so chloroplast is the organelle that makes photosynthesis happen. And inside of a chloroplast, there's different structures, okay? And let's just start from the basic one. So chloroplasts contain photosynthetic membranes, and these are called thylakoids, okay? Kind of like green pancakes. And then, of course, it has a membrane. A stack of thylakoids is called a granum. Many are called grana, like many stacks. And then the stroma is liquid, or the fluid portion around these stacks of green pancakes or thylakoids, okay? And so that'll all be important when we talk about where stuff happens and what's happening in each thing, okay? So light is a form of energy. Any compound that absorbs light absorbs energy. So chlorophyll absorbs light, which means it's absorbing energy. And so when chlorophyll absorbs light, we transfer that light to electrons. So this is where it gets more intense than probably previous years. These high energy electrons make photosynthesis work, okay? And so this picture right here, we'll go over it a lot. But there's two different reactions in photosynthesis: the light dependent reactions and the light independent reactions, okay? And of course, if you depend on something, right, like you rely on it for you to live, like we depend on oxygen, right? Well, so these light dependent reactions rely on light. They can't happen without light. Light independent doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't depend on light, because of course you can see right here what we make in the light dependent reactions we need as reactants in the light independent reactions. But it just means it can happen at night. It doesn't have to happen during the day. Okay, so high energy electrons, they can be used to do work, okay? And so the analogy from an other book that I had could summarize as like a hot potato. And so I don't know if it's like the best analogy, but it's just basically saying like we need a carrier. So these are called carriers. So NADP plus is an electron carrier, which means it carries the electrons, hot potatoes, to where the electrons need to go, okay? And so this happens because NADP plus, there it is. You do not need to know this name. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. I'm not going to ask you that, but just the letters and the positive sign. And so what happens is it is converted. So what it does is it accepts 2 high energy electrons along with a hydrogen ion. Okay, ions have charges. And so it is converted, I would highlight this, it is converted into NADH. So remember, NADH is holding 2 electrons, okay? It's holding 2 electrons. And those electrons will be important here in a little bit. Okay, so you can see right here, see the positive, and notice how it went to just an H, right? Like it accepted a hydrogen. In order to accept a hydrogen, you also have to accept electrons. So we're holding electrons into this molecule. Of course, you don't need to know this. This is just like biochemistry stuff. But hey, there you go, for your benefit. And so here is the equation. And sorry for this. This should be an arrow. Here's the equation for photosynthesis, okay? 6 CO2, so 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, plus 6 molecules of water in the presence of light energy yields glucose, and oxygen. Better to say glucose here, probably. Notice this is a balanced equation. I don't know if you ever worked on those in physical science. You will next year in chemistry. And so organisms, but we can use those sugars for a lot of different things, right? We can use them as sources of energy to make ATP, but we can also use them to make starches. And we can use that energy to be the foundational energy of making other compounds that the plant needs, okay? So an overview of photosynthesis has 2 major reactions, and these are test questions, okay? So there's 2 major reactions in photosynthesis, light-dependent and light-dependent reactions. So the first question we need to ask is where each one takes place, and then what are the products and reactants of each. If you know this, you're good to go, okay? And so I gave you a little summary here. So what goes in a light-dependent reaction is water and light, ADP and NAD+. Okay, so these are all note cards that need to be made. Oxygen and ATP and NADPH are what come out. Where does it take place? Membranes, okay? In a light-independent reaction, CO2 is coming in, which has basically no energy in it. NADPH and ATP, that energy, right, the electrons and the ATP energy are used to build sugars, specifically glucose for our purposes. And then ADP and NADP plus is released to go back to the light-dependent reactions. Where does it take place? The stroma, okay? So here's like a little graphic to show you this, okay? So here we are in the light reactions. Notice these are the thylakoid membranes. Thylakoid. And this is water going in and oxygen being released and light happening. And CO2 is going in and sugars are released over here, okay? So I'll show you these videos in class, but Revelation 4:11 says, "Worthy are you, our Lord and our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and because of your will they existed and they were created and were created." The entire Bible teaches that God is the creator. So could this have just randomly come together over millions and millions of years? And there's a lot of, struggles with defining that. If you dive into this, of course, I don't have time in this video to do that. But in class, I might show you this video about how ketchup is made and then relate that to the complexity of photosynthesis. Okay, so here's our objectives. So describe what happens during the light-dependent reactions and, of course, the light-independent reactions. Okay, and so I'll explain this is a biblical worldview, which I'll hopefully explain in class, okay? And then let's just start right here for notes. Okay, so light-dependent reactions. Because they require the direct involvement of light and light-absorbing pigments. That's why they're called light-dependent reactions. So again, we're making ATP and NADPH. Lots of energy here, right? This energy is going to be used to build sugars. These reactions take place, where do they take place? The thylakoid membranes. And then, of course, water is required. Why is water needed? Super important. Because water is needed for electrons and hydrogen ions. We actually split water in photosynthesis. That's why plants have to have water, because they need a source of electrons to energize, to go to the Calvin cycle to build sugars, okay? And so thylakoids have something called photosystems, which basically contain pigments for our purposes right now in biology and biology honors. And so summary of light-dependent reactions is right here. Let me show you this picture, okay? This picture is, I believe, in your notes. And so let's just walk through this picture together, okay? First off, let's start with where are we? Where are we? We're in a thylakoid, but specifically a thylakoid membrane. Photosystem 1, photosystem 2, which is where pigments are at. They named it that way because they found that one first, and they were like, well, we can't change it, so they just put PS2 at the beginning. Okay, so let's highlight some stuff. Water. We need water for electrons. Okay, what's released is oxygen gas. Okay, so water is broken to release electrons. Let's follow the path of the electron now. So we energize that electron right here, energize it by absorbing light, right? And then that electron is used, and you see how it's kind of going downhill? That electron is used to pump, right? So that's active transport, right? To pump hydrogens across. So these are all these colors are proteins, which means they have to be made from correct DNA sequences. And so hydrogens are pumped from low to high this way, okay? So let me erase proteins. And so what we're doing is we're pumping hydrogens from low to high and creating kind of like a hydrogen ion dam over here. Like a lot of hydrogens over here. And I'll just kind of like highlight it, right? Like with a different color. Orange, fine. Like tons of hydrogens on this side in the interior. Tons and tons and tons. Like lots and lots and lots. Not many out here, right? Not many. And so we're kind of creating a lot of hydrogens on one side, not many on the other. That's called a gradient, okay? That's called a gradient. And so then the electron needs to be re-energized, right? So we re-energize the electron, absorbing light, and then that electron is attached right there, and that's where the electron stays, okay, for our purposes right now. So NADP plus has accepted the electron. It's an electron carrier, and NADPH now has it, okay? And so NADP, let me just kind of highlight this. So NADPH and ATP are both going to the Calvin cycle, okay? Because they contain energy and power, reducing power. Don't need to know what that term is right now. But they contain energy and electrons needed to build stuff. And we're going to be building sugars, okay? But what about these hydrogen ions, okay? Like we said, we build ATP. Well, how does that work? Well, through an enzyme, an amazing enzyme, which I'll show you a video of, hopefully, in class. And you can look them up on YouTube. Very complex motor, like 9 different subunits, something like that. And it's going from high to low. So it's flowing downhill, but actually ATP synthase has a place for the hydrogens to flow downhill. And so what happens is this enzyme basically turns as hydrogens flow downhill from high to low. And as it turns, it literally takes a phosphate, inorganic phosphate, and ADP, which has 2 phosphates, and makes ATP, okay? So this is the electron transport chain in the thylakoid membrane, okay? Building NADPH and ATP. And how do we build? We're using light. Okay, I'll show you many pictures about this, and I mean videos as well. And so what happens now is that we go to the light-independent reactions. ATP and NADPH are needed because they're the energy and power to produce high-energy sugars, right? Carbon dioxide, you can't really burn CO2. Not really any energy in it. But you can burn sugar. There's tons of energy in sugar. And so we can't create energy, right? So we have to take these molecules and produce high-energy sugars. No light is required. That's why it's called light-independent, so it can happen at night. And light-independent reactions take place outside. Where does it take place? One more time, in the stroma. Okay, so this is known as the Calvin cycle, named after the gentleman who found it. And again, I'll try to show you some videos. And so the Calvin cycle uses 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. 6. Why? Because 6 CO2 has 6 carbons, and we're trying to build C6H12O6. Notice that it's 6 carbons. Oh, wow, that's horrible. 6 carbons and 6 carbons. That's why you need 6 CO2. Okay? And so the two, of course, work together. And here is the 3 steps of the Calvin cycle. Notice that we are just doing it 3 times right now. And again, only one goes in at a time. But of course, this is happening in 6 different places at the same time. So I'll show you a video as well about that. But the basic thing, don't get too hung up on numbers. I'm not going to be like that with you. I want you to understand the concept. And so the concept is this. There's 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. First step, carbon fixation. Fixation means it's not broken, it's just attached. So CO2 is attached to a molecule that's waiting for it. 1,3-ribulose bisphosphate. You don't have to know that name, but it's attached by an enzyme, one of the most important enzymes on the planet, Rubisco. And so it's attached, right? This molecule has to be there at the beginning. And of course, that leads to interesting conversations of how could it all evolve over time, and gradual, step-by-step Darwinian, methods. So Rubisco attaches it, and then it separates into something. But here's what I want you to see. We input energy, and we input power from the electrons, right? Reduction just means we are adding, electrons and hydrogens. So adding electrons and hydrogens, which that has energy, right? That has energy in it. Hydrogens have energy with electrons. And so we are adding energy, power to it. And then that, of course, makes a product, G3P technically, don't need to know that, but we're basically making glucose. That's what you need to know, making glucose. But we have to recycle. We have to rebuild what was waiting at the start. And so that's called regeneration. It takes energy to rebuild something. And so that's why we have energy and regenerate the molecule that was waiting at the start. And again, where is this happening? This is happening in the stroma. Okay? And so here's the process. Key questions. Can you answer them? What happens during light-dependent reactions? What goes in? What comes out? Where does it happen? And then the same for light-independent reactions. Okay? So that is photosynthesis. I hope this was helpful. Again, we'll go through a lot in class, review, watch some videos. But thank you for taking notes at home. I hope you have a great rest of your day.